And welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Emotion and Stress, Unit 7, Part 1. We're doing modules 56 through 57 on this video, and then our last video will be 58 and 59. All right, let's get into it, shall we? Emotions. What the heck are they and what do they encompass? So we have emotions as a complex psychological state or response, and the components within emotion are three things, and we really want to write these down and maybe highlight these. Physiological arousal. So when we think of sympathetic and parasympathetic, our body, say when we get scared, we become aroused. We become our temperature goes up. We start to sweat, right? So those are physiological arousal reactions, right? We have expressive behaviors like our facial expressions. So like right now, we can tell in this picture that they are laughing and they are happy, right? So expressive behavior. And then we also have the consciously experienced thoughts and feelings along with it all, right? So it's all kind of happening. Many things are happening at once, right? So emotions, complex psychological state or response, and these are the three components that it falls under. So before we get into all the theories, and of course there's theories, my friends, because what else do we have, right? So emotions, so let's talk about the functions. They can act as a trigger of motivated behavior. They can contribute to our rational decision making and purposeful behavior. We can, some people, if they're in so if something like, so say if they get in a fight with a girlfriend or boyfriend, that might be a chain reaction to purposeful behavior of saying, oh, we're going to break up now, or, whatever, or something, right? But it leads to purposeful behavior. Can help in understanding and maintaining relationships, right? Emotions are super, super important when it comes to relationships. It's a way of communicating, right? But also through the evolutionary lens, emotions are in a way that we adapt to problems of survival and reproduction. So again, thinking about evolutionary, a lot of this is survival, is understanding people's facial expressions, right? Sorry, I thought there was one more. But anyway, so we can act as triggers, contribute to rational decision making, understanding and maintaining relationships, along with an evolutionary lens of how we adapt and survive. So going into the physiological differences, let's just do a little throwback to our amygdala, because of course Amy is a part of this, right? Because remember, our limbic system is our emotion system, right? And our hypothalamus is in charge, right? Our janitor is in charge. So physical responses like finger temperature and movement of facial expressions change during fear, rage, and joy, right? Our amygdala shows differences in activation during emotions of anger and rage, while activity in the left hemisphere is usually happy, and right on the right side of when we go under a scanner and all of this is being done and we're being our emotions are being activated in different ways. Usually, so there's a correlation with activity in our left in our hemisphere is usually happy emotions, and emotions in our right tend to light up for sad or depressed emotions. And it's really interesting because when we get into abnormal psychology later, some groups of people, psycho and sociopaths, their brains are the opposite, right? So when we show a picture of happiness or something that's good, different parts of their brain light up, right? So again, this is another way that we can kind of see how our brain works, and again, our physiological response is attached to our emotions, right? So again, physiological responses related to emotion, fear, anger, love are very similar. And I just want to throw this out there. I'm going to tell you something that I think is quite true to this day. You can't hate someone without having some love before. Love and hate are from different sides of the same coin. Love and hate are both very strong emotions, and they usually are connected together. So, when we say that we hate someone, there's usually some connection beforehand that it may involve, they used to be your best friend, you loved them, right? So again, love and hate, two sides of the same coin, my friends. You hate to love them, right? So again, very, very interesting. So now we're going to go into emotional theories, and we don't need to write this down. We don't need to write down the slide, but we are going to start with our first one, which is called the James Lange theory. And these are just James and Lange, and they're the ones that created our first theory. So we're going to want to write down our first theory, which is the James Lange theory. This is the big spine of our emotion section, are these theories. So James Lange theory, of course, William, James, and Carl Lange, of course, they made it about them, they gave themselves the names. They proposed an idea that was completely opposed to the common sense view at the time. James Lange theory proposed that the physiological activity precedes the emotional experience. So our bodily changes ultimately cause you to feel emotions. So essentially, we have to be psychologically aroused before we know that we are happy or scared, right? So if Sally sees a bear, right? We believe that first we have to have the physiological response of like blood pressure going up and her heat temperature going up, and then the emotions will happen. So it's almost like a math problem. If you want to write it like a math problem, physiological stimulus first equals emotion. And this will also have a portion of our slides that you can copy down where it kind of makes a little bit more sense at the end. Perfect. So we have our, I forgot I added these in. So we have our stimulus, right? Which is whatever triggered our, so say that a bear jumps out, Sally's physiological response is triggered, which will then lead to emotions. Okay, so write this down as almost like a math problem, okay? So there was an event that triggered the psychological response first, and then emotions come second, okay? So our next theory, right, is saying, no, I'm not really sure that this is true. I'm not sure if this is the way that it's laid out. So we next have Cannon-Bard theory. And again, we don't write them down. I just want you to see what they look like. But Cannon-Bard theory believed something a little different. Cannon-Bard theory proposed that our emotion-triggering stimulus and our bodily arousal happen at the same time. They happen at the same time. Simultaneously is a key buzzword for this theory. So they believe, the thalamus produces a physical and emotional stimulus, sends the message, right, down to through our nervous system, right, and to our cerebral cortex at the same time, okay, at the same time. So it flows through to our autonomic nervous system, right, and it hits at the same time. So simultaneously. So let's see what it looks like in our little terms. So we have our stimulus. So say it's a birthday, right? And for a surprise birthday, right? And then everyone surprises Sally. What the Cannon-Bard theory believes is that the physiological response and the emotion happen at the same time. So Sally gets surprised, her blood pressure goes up, she starts to sweat while realizing she is surprised, all at the same time, simultaneously. Okay, Cannon-Bard theory, emotions and the physiological response happen at the same time. Because remember, James Lange, right, if we go back, James Lange believes that first stimulus, second physiological response, and then emotions. It's a three-step, right? But Cannon-Bard believes it happens at the same time. And of course, we have another theorist who's like, no, I don't think that's quite right? So our next guy, or shall I say guys, is the Satcher and Singer theory. So the Satcher and Singer theory is a little bit more complex, okay? The Satcher and Singer, they proposed that our physiological responses and our cognitions create emotions. So what they believe, and this is very important, we want to highlight this, emotions have two factors, and it has to be cognitively labeled. So right next to this, I want you to think of kindergarten. If you've ever heard of a kindergarten teacher say, tell me how that makes you feel, and the kid's like, I feel sad, I feel upset. Those are cognitive labels. You're cognitively labeling how you feel. And you have to cognitively think, I feel this way, in order for the emotion to come after. So we first have our stimulus, okay? And then we have our psychological response and our cognitive label. We have to have those two things before we have our emotions. So if you think of the two-factor theory, think of it as having two factors, a physiological response and a cognitive label, thus equals emotions, okay? Thus equals emotions. So think of these as almost like math formulas. So think of these as algorithms, right? These are just different types of algorithms that our psychologists kind of came up with, trying to explain how we go through our emotions, right? How do we get to our emotional states, right? So again, two-factor theory, we have to add in a cognitive label of I feel this way, right? So think kindergarten, and that's why we teach it in kindergarten, so they can start realizing how they feel, right? And know, and like, oh, I feel this way because of this, right? So anyway, two-factor theory. Here's our clouds, thunder, heart rate goes up, our cognitive label saying, I'm scared, right? There's the scared face I created. So real quick, I want you guys to look at this hierarchy, and I would like you to pause this and copy it down. It has all three theories of emotion and how they kind of break it up. And this was in your old textbook, and I'm not sure if it's in your new textbook, but I liked the way that it was kind of set up. So we have our James Lang, right? So here's our stimuli. James Lang believes that first you have to have arousal and then the emotion. Cannon-Bard believes these happen simultaneously at the same time. And the Satcher and Singer theory, you have arousal plus a cognitive label, and then you feel fear. Okay, so here I would highly recommend just pausing the video and copying this down in your notes. It's a really great visual of how they compare to each other. So the two routes of emotion, so we have Sejong, I want to say is how the book says you pronounce it, and Lazarus. Lazarus was not in our old textbook. This is kind of a new appraisal of emotions. Okay, this is a new appraisal of emotions, and again, look at, so our old book from 1996, this was in 1998, right? So it's newer information. They believe, so Zejonc, Ledoux, and Lazarus, they believed that, and they believe that some emotions were immediate without conscious appraisal. So without consciously realizing it, we're already feeling, it's almost like an instinct, right? So I really want you to highlight without conscious appraisal, because that's what makes theirs different than the other theories, right? So for them, right, so we have an event, we have an appraisal, but it could be unconscious, right? It could be an instinct, it could be almost like a reflex, which leads to emotional responses, right? So the really key difference is that without conscious appraisal, they believe that we can go through emotions without even consciously thinking, oh, now I am scared, right? Think of it as almost like a evolutionary adaptation, right? Instinctual. So, and I'm just going to go through each of the people's kind of ideas about it. And you don't have to write everything on this slide. I'm going to let you know. So Zejonc, or Zejonc, I think it's Zejonc now that I think about it, argues that emotional reactions can be quicker than our interpretation of the situation. So we feel before we think. That's Zejonc's. We feel before we think. And his example is, feel scared when in the woods, hear a twig crack before you even have time to think about it. You're like, right? Before it's like an instinctual. So think instinctual, right? And I want you guys to write this little blurb and the one I highlighted and the one that I bolded. So research on neurological processes support this idea. Some neural pathways involved in emotion bypass the cerebellum, and which are full of our automatic reactions, right? And it increases thinking. So it's almost like, you guys remember the reflexive response of touching a hot pan, it hits our spine and comes out before we even realize what's happening. Same thing here. Same thing here, okay? Ledoux, please, if anyone's taking French, please let me know if I'm just butchering this. But something to add, they added that there are different states of consciousness with emotions. So he believed that there is a route straight to the amygdala, right? So really instinctual hits right to the amygdala, which is our fear and our aggression. But we can also have cortical conscious thoughts. So like, and cortical is just it's like an outside layer of the cerebellum. Yeah, it's very interesting. So and again, this is all new research. So there's really I don't know too much, right? But essentially what I want you to know is that Ledoux added the aspect of different states of consciousness, different states. with emotions. And Lazarus, I did a little research on Lazarus with our last book because he was pretty new in our last book. But he argues that while our brain does produce a lot of reactions unconsciously, even instantaneously felt emotions require some type of cognitive appraisal. So otherwise, how do we know what we're responding to? So in a way, Lazarus is still challenging that while our brain does do a lot of things unconsciously, right? So our automatic nervous system, right? It does things unconsciously, right? Regulates our body temperature, all this stuff. He still believes that even if it's instantaneous, we still need a little bit of cognitive appraisal, right? So he's almost more on the Satcher and Singer theory. But so he's kind of still in the middle of that. He's in the middle. So just a few buzzwords connecting to those names, okay? And just when we talk about experiences of emotion, Ekman, so you want to know Ekman, he came up with this idea that we have basic primary emotions, and we have 7 of them, and these are expressions that are culturally worldwide the same. A smile means the same thing all around the world, right? So he believes that these 4 emotions we have innately. We are born with this ability of having these similar emotions, right? So biologically determined, most presented at birth, right? So these 7 are presented even as an infant, right? Often experienced in blends or mixed emotions, nonverbal facial expressions lead to our ancestors' survival. So the 7 that Ekman believe are our primary is joy, anger, disgust. So if you eat something like you don't like, you're like, ah! And this baby reminds me of a baby eating a lemon. Surprise, sadness, and fear. These are the 7 that are innate. These emotions kind of come with our survival. Okay, that's what Ekman believed. And cultural and emotional expression, a little bit more on Ekman, is that he believed that people speak and understand pretty much the same facial language around the world. Okay, no matter what language you speak, a smile is still interpreted quite similar all around the world, right? So when culturally diverse people were shown basic facial expressions, they all did pretty well at recognizing them, right? There is no need for a language when we have our facial expressions, especially the ones that are universal, right? So, for example, what is she feeling? We all kind of get the idea that she is feeling happy, right? What is he feeling? I telling you right now, my optic nerve is saying he ain't happy. I would say anger, right? What is he feeling? People would say fear, right? So again, our ability to understand facial expressions fall under emotional intelligence, right? So a little bit about gender, emotion, and nonverbal behavior, and this is just kind of our topics we go over after our theories. Women tend to be, again, high correlations, not cause and effect experiments. These are just high correlational studies. Women tend to be much better at discerning nonverbal emotions than men. Women tend to be able to read facial expressions at a better rate and accuracy than men. Again, correlational. When showed sad and happy, scary movie films, women expressed emotions more than men. But some of this biologically based, but overall it often depends on culture, right? So different cultures teach men and women to display different emotions. Most research has not shown one sex to be emotionally expressive than another, right? Culture dictates. What does our culture in America say about men expressing emotions versus females, right? Nature versus nurture. Even though nature, we are given our ability to have our 7 basic emotions, how does our environment shape it, right? What if we grew up in a household that said it's not okay for you to cry when you're hurt or, whatever, right? So again, there's many factors going in, many factors. Detecting and computing emotion, right? So most people find it difficult to detect emotion, and most trained professionals like police officers, psychiatrists, judge, the people who do the polygraph test, people use deceiving emotions 54% of the time, right? you have a good chance about like half of your people trying to lie, right? And it could be social pressures. It could be you're doing something that's like not socially okay, right? But again, there's just a lot of factors going in, right? And for this one, you don't have to. I mean, you can write down this slide, but I just found it really interesting, right? Detecting and computing emotions. So signs, and okay, so these you don't have to write down. I just thought these were really cool to share. So signs that can indicate deception. Hiding the truth costs the liar some cognitive effort, resulting in heightened attention. So people who are lying tend to have dilated pupils, longer pause times in speech, and more constrained movement where they're very like stiff because they're on high alert. Because usually people who are telling the truth, they don't have to be on as alert because they're telling the truth, right? They're just saying what they know. Hiding one's true feelings may cause the liar to become physically and behaviorally more aroused, evident in posture shifts, speech errors, nervous gestures, and shrugging. So people who touch their face a lot means that they're nervous. It's a nervous tick. Many deceivers focus on keeping a poker face. So pay attention to the speaker's body movements, smiles, hand gestures. Eyes can give away a sign that they're opposite of what the person is trying to portray, right? So again, dilated pupils. If the person generally tells the truth, they will probably be unable to look you straight in the eye. Yet this is not true for practiced liars. Interesting stuff. So you guys don't write this down, but I hope it got you kind of thinking about who's been deceiving you lately, right? So there is the facial feedback hypothesis, and we would usually do this in class, but clearly you're not. You're more than welcome to try this at home. But it assumes that emotional expression can cause an emotional experience that the expression signifies. So studies show that emotional expression can lead to physical changes in emotions. So what this is the pencil test. So if you put a pencil in your mouth like this, it imitates smiling in your facial expressions. And they find that people who did this after about 10 minutes were starting to feel happier because their facial expressions we're experiencing that motion, right? So there's a connection. So it's a facial feedback hypothesis. Again, a hypothesis, but it has been some correlation between those studies. So it's almost kind of like, fake it till you make it. Like, right, try to be like, if you like smile more, try to, all those things, right? So, but it leads to emotional shifts. So just like if you're frowning all the time, it could lead to more sad thoughts, right? So it's a facial feedback hypothesis. Also, studies have found, my friends, that students who value love more than money report higher life satisfaction. Fun fact, you can have all the money in the world and yet you still could be unhappy, right? Right. So pick love, my friends, pick love. Yeah. And this is going to be our last little slide, I believe. Yeah. For our emotions section before we get into stress and illness. But please pick 2 of these bullet points to write down per box. And again, just looking at the biopsychosocial lens, biologically, how do emotions connect? We have physiological arousal, evolutionary adaptiveness, our response ways in our brain. We have our psychological influences, cognitive labeling, gender differences. And then we have our social cultural influences, right? Expressiveness, presence of other, cultural expectations, right? So this is all kind of a big portion of our pie, our emotional pie. All right, my friends, hang in there. We got one more video and then you are a free person.